Round 2 of the Stanley Cup Playoffs is officially underway. Welcome to the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live, presented by Sticks.com. Katie Gauze, Michael Agello here with you. And kicking things off, we had a barn burner. It was the Toronto Maple Leafs getting a big win in Game 1 over the defending champs, the Florida Panthers. 5-4, the final score in that game. And it's a lot closer than it was throughout points of this game. At one point, we did see a 4-1 lead for the Leafs, and then things changed, including the goaltender. But let's talk a little bit big picture before we dive into some of the big storylines for this game. And that is Toronto coming out. They were starting hot. Willie Nylander got the ball rolling, but we saw a lot of good things from Toronto. This was a big game, I feel like, to set the tone, to prove themselves, to prove to people that this was going to be an interesting series. They've got my attention. But what stood out to you in this game tonight, Michael?
Just the championship pedigree of the Florida Panthers, because they're down 4-1, and I know that gives Maple Leaf fans PTSD. 4-1. But they were up 4-1, and I think dominating through the first two periods of the game. And then they get that goal early in the third period, and then all of a sudden, everybody is biting their fingernails at Scotiabank Arena because they know that this team, the Leafs, they seem to give up leads at the most inopportune times. And this game was important for them to win, to get out to a lead. They held on. They took advantage of, I think, a subpar performance from Sergei Bobrovsky. But there's a lot of concern about Anthony Stolarz and Joseph Woll because he came in cold and did not play great in the third period.
Yeah, I am trying to give him, Woll, the benefit of the doubt, right? Because it's certainly a very difficult situation to come into. So maybe that is not a fair assessment of exactly what he's capable of. That being said, as he continued throughout the game, it still wasn't necessarily great. There were some things that I saw from him getting beat up high, maybe a little concerning. But what's more concerning ultimately is what's going on with Anthony Stolarz, right? So he gets the elbow from Bennett when he's kind of driving into the net on a play there, stays in the game for about 2 minutes. Then we saw video surfacing online and on the broadcast of Stolarz over at the Leafs bench actually vomiting. He then leaves the game. We saw sources online confirming that he was actually taken out on a stretcher, likely going to the hospital. Again, when you have vomiting after any kind of a potential head injury, it's a huge red flag. It is get to the emergency room. You've got to be so careful with those types of situations. So it's going to be very much up in the air. I don't think we'll have any answers, at least tonight, on what's the status with Stolarz, other than hoping he is okay. But in terms of game 2, if it is Joseph Woll, who should be backing up, and what do we think about this potential goalie scenario that they could be in?
Well, I was saying before we went live here, they have a goaltender who played pretty well and stayed healthy all year with the Toronto Marlies, who won 2 Stanley Cups. So yes. I would be shocked if Matt Murray wasn't the backup for Joseph Woll in Game 2 on Wednesday. There's a lot of concern for Stolarz. Now, I know the broadcast, the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, said that it was maybe a conflagration of the first period, him taking the shot from Sam Reinhart right off the mask, knocking the mask off, and then Sam Bennett sewers him with an elbow. And please do not tell me that was not on purpose. Sam Bennett does not do things by mistake, especially when they're dirty. Mm-hmm. So, I think it was I think it was purposeful. It will be curious to see whether the league.
What do you think? Is this going to be reviewed? Is that your anticipation?
Well, I would think so, and it's not the only call that should be reviewed. How about Dmitry Kulikov freight training Pontus Holmberg at the end of the second period, and that was a hit to the head. So. The only way to stop this team, and they've done it with you saw Brandon Hagel get the business end of the elbow from Aaron Ekblad, and now 2 things. They're setting the tone. I understand that's what Paul Maurice wants them to do. That's the type of hockey that they want to play. But they're dirty. They are really dirty. Not as dirty as the Broad Street Bullies. And I was 8 years old when that team won the Stanley
But
Cup.
the league is a lot different than it was then, right?
Exactly. The league. This is I said when we spoke yesterday about this series, don't be surprised if Ryan Reeves gets in there. I don't think they'll go this way this quickly, but if it keeps going like this, you're going to see number 75 in there at some point.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a reminder when you start mentioning the hits from last series. It jogged my memory again. Like we didn't see Aaron Ekblad in the lineup tonight. Tonight was his last game of that 2-game suspension that he was serving for that hit on Hagel. So he will be reinserted into the lineup for game 2. What I will say is that I think it was noticeable, not just from a goaltending change, but there was a lot of self-inflicted wounds that the Panthers were giving themselves throughout the first 2 periods of this game. That started to change in the 3rd period. Granted, that final goal where there was a miscommunication and they didn't have enough guys on the ice. 4 players were on the ice and 1 defenseman short for that final goal by Nyes that ends up being the game winner. But in general, I expect to see Florida coming out and playing a little bit smarter and a little bit harder and a little bit better right from the start. It felt like they were building towards that in this 3rd period. What would you say maybe will be a difference for them in this next game? Because I think Toronto maybe caught them, on and off night. Bobrovsky, like you mentioned earlier, definitely not his perfect game, and you have to capitalize when those nights come around. But it feels like Florida will be probably a little scarier when we get into game 2.
Yeah, and Bobrovsky, we know he bounces back. I mean, I almost get the feeling that Andrei Vasilevsky stole Bobrovsky's jersey and was wearing it with the Panthers. Yeah, that was sort of a Vasilevsky sort of performance. Toronto, it was almost the perfect start, with the exception of the too many men on the ice penalty that gave Seth Jones. They gave them power play with the Seth Jones goal.
Right.
It was a perfect first period with Nylander scoring the first 2 goals, and then Morgan Riley on that 2-on-1 break, smoking it by Bobrovsky. Then they extend the lead on the Tanev goal, which was a knuckleballer. Toronto was in good shape, but I think the Stolarz, his disappearance,
the injury, getting pulled.
I think that sort of stunned them, because you're not used to seeing a player throwing up on the bench and being in some sort of distress. So I will cut Joseph Wall a little slack. I know that there are people out there who think the only chance that the Leafs have to win is Stolarz. Well, you're probably going to have to depend on Joseph Wall now for at least 2 or 3 games, and maybe longer, because if this is concussion related, then Stolarz isn't going to play for a while.
Well, everyone, you are watching the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy live, presented by Sticks.com. Don't break the bank on sticks when you can get a pro-level composite stick without the pro-level price tag at Sticks.com. That is Stix.com. So make sure to head over there and check it out. We've got a comment here. It says, tell me Stolarz had a case of bad Toronto Subway sushi. Maybe that was the case. Doesn't seem that way, right? It would be wishful thinking to think he just suddenly happened to get sick at the exact same time after getting knocked in the head, not once, but probably twice. Pretty good in this game. We obviously talked about the impact that he has on what could happen with the rest of this series if he is not able to return for game 2 or beyond. But another avenue I want to discuss is we've talked a lot about depth and different players needing to step up. And tonight that was very much on display. You've got a goal from Chris Tanev, a goal from Morgan Riley, so the D getting involved. What did you see from Toronto's defensive core tonight? Were they activating more, just getting involved? Tanev, I think we saw a note from our producer, 2nd ever playoff goal. So gotta love when guys like that are getting on the score sheet. What did you see?
It's bizarre, because they had the lowest scoring blue line in the NHL during the regular season, and now I believe the broadcast said they had 7 goals from their blue line. That's bizarre. Now, Morgan Riley is a very good offensive defenseman. He didn't have a particularly good year, but they are getting contributions from secondary sources, and I think that's been the key to them, beating Ottawa and now taking a lead against Florida.
Absolutely. And it looks like we have a guest joining us from live in Toronto. Our own Ryan Kennedy was there at the game. So let's get in with him and talk a little bit about what the scoop is. Ryan, what's going on at the rink? What have you heard?
Well, obviously, post game, the big story in the Leafs dressing room was Anthony Stolarz, who obviously left the game, suspected concussion. The Leafs obviously were tight-lipped. Several were asked about Sam Bennett, and they said they didn't see it, as players always do when it comes to something controversial. But I know, just looking at Twitter right now, some people are saying it was the slap shot that Stolarz took earlier in the game that might have caused that suspected concussion. But guys like Morgan Riley and Chris Tanev chose to focus more on Joseph Woll coming in cold and and getting the Leafs the win, even though it was not easy.
Yeah, I mean, you were there in person, obviously, when things started to get a little bit nerve-wracking when the score tightened up. What was the feeling overall in the arena? Was a good atmosphere for this game one? And what did the Leafs show, despite what the final score was, in terms of their performance in this first game?
Yeah, I will say, things got pretty quiet here in Toronto for a while, like when the Cats were making their comeback. And I will say, I mean, the building had been really rocking the entire game. Obviously, Nylander scoring on the first shift helped, but I mean, the crowd was really into it. And as we know, that's not always the case in Toronto, but this was certainly an occasion where the crowd rose to the level of playoff hockey and got quiet. And then, of course, when Matthew Nye scored, the roof came off the place. I think it was a huge relief for all the fans here. And, it kind of salted things away for all intents and purposes. And you know what? I think in general, the Leafs showed a lot of resolve. I thought, the one goal that Woll gave up from Balvis, that probably could have had that one back, but otherwise the first one was a tip. One of the other ones went off two sticks and over his shoulder. So, for a guy that hasn't played probably in weeks, I thought Woll did an admirable job.
Ryan, I look at the what happened in Dallas on Saturday, Colorado blowing a 2-0 lead, and what the disaster that happened to St. Louis and Winnipeg last night. You would think that these teams would learn from the fact that really you cannot sit on a lead in a playoff game, especially against a team like Florida who will take you to the woodshed. I mean, did Craig Berube address the fact that they got a little complacent in the third period?
Yeah, Chris Tanev actually talked about that when Berube took the timeout. That he basically said, like, hey, let's get back to our game. We're sitting back too much. And that's how Florida's going to get back into it. I'm not sure what Berube himself said because I had to rush up to hop on the show. But in terms of the players, I think they knew what happened, and it was a pretty good lesson for them that luckily they escaped with the game one win. But I think they recognize when you're playing the defending champs, like you're only going to get so many chances to get it right. And so I think Toronto, the fact that they pulled it out, it's got to be a confidence builder, but also a good lesson for the Leafs.
Well, Ryan, heading into this series, everyone kind of has their own, predictions and opinions. What was your kind of prediction leading into this? And has anything changed in terms of just this first game and what you were able to see from Toronto? I know for me personally, I wasn't exactly sure. Florida kind of came off so dangerous looking after what they did to just totally dismiss the Tampa Bay Lightning. Had me a little concerned about how competitive Toronto was going to be able to stay. They kind of started to change my opinion as this game went on. What did you see maybe that will lead to this series maybe being more interesting than some people gave Toronto credit for? Because there were a lot of haters already.
Yeah, so I kind of had a different take coming into this series. I think Toronto actually had a chance to win it, and it's not so much about them, but yes, Florida beat Tampa Bay in 5 games, but they were battered by the Lightning, just as they battered the Lightning physically. And, you know, we were talking up here in the press box, and think about the long list of Tampa Bay injuries that came out after that series. You think Florida's any different? Like, those guys are just playing through it. I mean, if you look at Matthew Tkachuk tonight, he was pretty immobile, and that's game one. And, like, Barkov took a hit early where he was wincing, and you have to say to yourself, okay, well, was that one hard hit, or was that the after effects of several hard hits from the previous series? Florida has played a ton of hockey the past 2 seasons. They've gone all the way both times. They got the title once. So I feel like if Toronto stays cool, right, if they play that Craig Berube unflappable hockey, I think they have a legitimate chance, because that war of attrition might be coming for Florida. And I think we saw it early in this game where they just look slow. And, you know, I mean, the Panthers, they're the cream of the crop in the NHL. We know that right now. But there's a physical limit at some point.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Ryan, I think the thing that would have a chilling effect on Florida, you know, doing what they do best, which is be cheap, is Toronto's power play being very good. And they were very good in the first 3 games against Ottawa. They got the 1 goal in game 6. They were 0 for 5 tonight. And I think there was an acknowledgement from Craig Berube where he puts out Morgan Rielly in the 3rd period on the point on the power play, because I think he was afraid of Florida scoring a shorthanded goal like they scored 10 during the regular season. Yeah,
I had the same thought. When I saw Rielly out there, it was like, okay, let's just make sure this is a neutral 2 minutes. You know, if you score a goal, that's great. But, you know, in a wider sort of a bigger picture, you know, I feel like, you know, a path for Toronto is like, you can't win a mud fight unless you don't participate. So if the Leafs stay away from the type of game that Florida is successful at, then that gives them a lane. And again, I mean, if the Leafs get back on their game on the power play where they were so effective at the beginning of the Ottawa series, that's going to put Florida in a bind. Even though the Panthers have some very good penalty killers, they can't be down a man so often in a game.
Well, we're seeing this reporting, Chris Johnston tweeting this out, but the post game with Craig Berube leaking out, and it's Bennett and Stolar as he comments on the interaction there, and he said, elbow to the head, clear as day, says he doesn't know how the officials missed calling it. So Craig Berube obviously feeling like whether the concussion or whatever the possible injury to Stolarz was, if it was from the slap shot or it was from the elbow to the head, still obviously bothering him, still not okay. Do you think between all the attention this is getting from the injury side, now Craig Berube calling it out, that, Ryan, we could see the Department of Player Safety taking a look at this? We talked about it a little bit earlier with Michael.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's the playoffs. Everything is under a microscope. And even though there was no penalty called, I mean, you know, player safety can still look at it. And they can make a judgment. And, you know, it's interesting because if you think about the way this game started, the first penalty of the game, Max Domi, the cross check on Marchand, where he didn't actually touch Marchand's body. It was like a cross check to the stick. But I think the referees were trying to set a tone of like, all right, like no nonsense tonight, guys. And clearly there was some nonsense. But it'll be interesting to see how the Department of Player Safety reacts to this, and if there is a reaction.
Yeah, well, we got a comment here. Is Sam Bennett officially public enemy number 1 in Toronto after that shot on Stolarz? I mean, truthfully, you've always got to have your head on a swivel. Bennett finds a way to be public enemy number 1 basically everywhere he goes. But it's funny, we joked about this before we went on the broadcast. He could be the type of guy who you hate right now, but who knows who's going to love him come this summer if he's no longer a Florida Panther. Certainly that one is an interesting storyline to keep an eye on.
He's the Darcy Tucker of 2025. You hate him until he's on your team, then you absolutely love him.
For sure.
No question. We talked about this earlier, Michael and I, but Ryan, do you have any thoughts on if we don't see Stolarz for game 2, if this would be a potential Matt Murray sighting?
Ooh, no. I think Joseph Wool, he's proven himself to be a very good playoff goaltender in his brief NHL career. And again, like, yeah, he gave up some goals tonight, but like he hadn't played in I don't know how many days. It's certainly been a couple of weeks. And he didn't even have a warm up, right? Like if
Because it
Stolarz had
wasn't
been pulled by the
concussion
concussion
toll.
spotter,
Yeah.
Wool would have gotten a warm up. But he came in cold. So I think, you give him time to, warm up, to have a morning skate and all that good stuff. And you're back to normal Joseph Wool, who has been very effective.
Well, not as the starter, but as the backup, because they had Hildeby as the number 3, and I know that in Ottawa they had Artur Aktiamov as the number 3. Neither of them have any any significant NHL experience. When you have a guy who's won 2 Stanley Cups and who did play very well with the Marlies this year, it would make sense that he'd be the backup behind Wall.
Yeah, and I mean the Marlies are done, right? They're out of the AHL playoffs, so now you have all the options at your disposal. And obviously Dennis Hildeby was here tonight, but no, I do see your point there that you do have Matt Murray on the long list now. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully Stolarz is okay, and maybe Wool plays game 2. But I mean we'll have to see what the diagnosis is.
All right, well, I want to get into a different topic here because we had some exciting news happening, obviously, before this game. It was league-wide news with the NHL draft lottery being held tonight, 7 o'clock, and the New York Islanders, who had like a 3.2 or something ridiculously low % chance of getting that first pick. They get it. It's the first time since 2009 that they will have that number 1 pick, and when they had it then, they took John Tavares, who is now with our Toronto Maple Leafs. So thoughts from both of you. We'll start with you, Ryan, on the Islanders getting this pick. I think if anything, we're just excited that it's someone a little different. What do you think?
I totally agree. Yeah, it's funny when they announced the pick, I was like, ooh, the Islanders, that's fun. I literally had not even thought about them as a possibility because they were so far down the list. And it's good when a team that didn't tank wins. I think it helps the process and it kind of validates the fact that it's a lottery. I also think that, the New York Islanders, they've been either a playoff team or just on the bubble for years now. But they don't have a great system. Like they don't have a great pipeline. It's getting better. Cole Yzerman was a great pick last year, but the chance to pick number 1, the chance to add Matthew Schaefer, which is probably the route to go because they need everything. So just go best player available. The chance to add him is very significant. He missed a lot of time this year due to injury. So I think it would be better for him to play one more year in junior or NCAA before he joins the Islanders. But once he does, I think he will be an incredible impact player on the blue line.
And that if he does stay in junior or the NCAA, I think he'd be the first number 1 overall pick to do that since I think Eric Johnson. It might have been Eric Johnson that was the last
Owen
one.
Power.
Well, that was with COVID. I sort of But before that, I think it was Eric Johnson. So I mean, and you're right. I mean, he missed most of the year with the knee injury that he suffered in the World Junior. So it's definitely he would benefit from some development. But I'm just joking here. But they could add Schaefer so they could trade Noah Dobson because they don't seem to want to pay Noah Dobson.
Oh yeah, there you go. Although. Ryan, we talked about this on the big show way back when we discussed the draft lottery and this whole Hagen's to Long Island. I mean, I don't think any of us actually thought they were going to get the pick, but now it feels like even though they have the opportunity to bring him home, they're probably not going to because how do you pass up on Shaver?
I would agree. I mean, it's a fun narrative, but like if you're taking Hagen's, then you are passing on Michael Misa. Who is a bigger center who is just as talented, if not maybe more so. You're passing on Porter Martone, who could be the next Kachuk brother spiritually, or the next Tom Wilson. I even think, I did a mock draft for the site right after. Anton Frondel came on really strong at the end of the season. He's also a center. He's bigger and stronger as well. So it's going to be very interesting because when you get to draft day, teams tend to get very skittish about quote unquote undersized players. And Higgins is obviously sub 6 foot, which qualifies. So it will be very interesting to see what happens.
When looking at the rest of the list, was there a team that maybe got the short end of the stick on this whole deal? Someone that stands out as really feeling like they deserved to be a lot higher than they ended up?
Not that they deserved it, but the Nashville Predators had a disastrous season, and they were third overall in terms of their odds.
Yeah.
And because Utah moved up, and because the Islanders jumped up and got the number 1 pick, Nashville, Philadelphia, Boston, Buffalo, they all slipped down 2 picks. So yeah, that hurts, because with some of these teams, with Nashville, that now if it does go Schaefer, Higgins, Misa, Martone, a lot of people think it's that top 4, and then it slides down a little bit. And you just said, Ryan, that Frundell is somebody who maybe is in that group, but there is a level where there's a top 5 or maybe top 4, and then it drops off a little bit.
Yeah, Nashville's a pretty good one there. I think maybe Boston dropped.
Yeah, they ended up in 7. Which
I
know that a lot of Bruins fans online were just like, really? We can't even tank and get rid of it. Like, nothing is going right. We're officially bad. Officially dead. I also saw some great conspiracy theories out there that by taking away the All-Star game, the NHL felt the need to make up for it by giving them the first pick. Don't believe that at all, but it's always.
I'd like to see how they fixed that lot. I mean, what did you think of the live lottery presentation?
Yeah.
I thought I was confused the entire time. I guess I didn't read the rules. I should have read them better. But I'm also like the anti-math person here. I'm all about the words and not about the numbers. So I don't know if there was any saving it for me. But the general consensus online was a lot of confusion as what was happening. But I did see a few people who were like, 13. And I was like, oh, so they knew what they needed. They understood the assignment here. So I guess, if anything, like you said, it certainly doesn't come across as something that could have been rigged the way that we maybe had our conspiracies in years past. Here's a question that we get. Let's talk to both of you guys about it. Real talk. How shook did Florida look in that first period? Or the Leafs, were the Leafs in their heads early? Is that possible? Or was this maybe just sometimes teams just don't start on time when they've got a little bit of a longer layover in this playoffs? Because Florida was one of the first. They were the first team done, I believe, in their series.
I think you're right. Yeah. I thought they looked a little sleepy to begin with, and I think the Leafs pounced on them because of it. And again, I think that the toll of that Tampa series, even though it wasn't a long series, I think it showed up tonight, and we'll have to see if it impacts Florida the rest of the way.
Yeah, I don't think that the Florida Panthers are intimidated by the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think they were caught on their heels, and Toronto built that lead. But I think any fears were wiped away by them coming back from 4-1 and almost tying that game with a couple opportunities in the third.
All right, guys. Well, before I get your thoughts on the exciting series that we have coming up tomorrow, we had a little more news tonight. The Calder Trophy finalists were announced. We had Celebrini, Hudson, and Wolf, which I think we've discussed on both of our shows, the wraparound and the big show. Those were the expectations. So are you guys happy with the finalists? And does it still feel like this is Hudson's award to lose? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I had all 3 of these guys on my ballot. So it makes sense to me. I think these are the 3 that really stood out, and it's a fun race because they all play different positions. So you really have to consider like what makes a Calder winner, right? I mean, Dustin Wolf didn't make the playoffs, but Calgary almost made it because of him. Montreal did make the playoffs, and Lane Hudson was a big reason. But Macklin Celebrini was fantastic for a Sharks team that we knew wasn't going to make the playoffs. And he had a battle level that I don't think we've ever seen in an NHL rookie in terms of what he was able to do on the ice in winning puck battles as a teenager.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that Mishkov didn't get in the top three. He had a pretty good season. Wolf, because Calgary basically went down to the last, I'd say, 10 days and still being in the race. That probably put him over the top. But if you looked at his statistics, and I did, he had like a 905 save percentage like the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season when Calgary was really battling for a playoff spot. So I'm a little surprised, but overall he had an excellent season. So I don't think anyone on this list is not deserving of a nomination.
Yeah, especially when you consider the goaltending position as a rookie is just so difficult. Truthfully, the amount of pressure, what he was able to do for a team that I mean, let's be honest, like they weren't very offensive for the majority of the year. So he was really having to be relied upon, not just making a couple saves. He was having to be the difference maker every night. So you got to give him credit for what he did there. All right, guys, we've got 2 big games that are kicking off round 2. One of them in the West, one of them in the East. So we won't get into the details as we wrap this up. But we'll start with you, Ryan. What's your prediction first? We've got Washington, Carolina, and then Vegas, Edmonton. Who's winning those first games?
I'm going to go Washington, and I'll say 7 games because I don't think a lot's going to separate these teams.
Okay.
But I think Logan Thompson might be the difference.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, what was the West one you wanted me to
We
weigh
got
in on?
Vegas and Edmonton.
Vegas and Edmonton. Okay. I'm going to say Vegas in 7 because
Love all the game 7s. Yes.
yeah, I don't think the Oilers are going to lose a game 6 at home.
Fair. All right, Michael.
I have Washington in 6 games. I'm still a little questionable about Freddie Anderson's health. They say he may play, but they're not 100% sure. And we know that Rod Brind'Amour does not have a lot of confidence in Peter Kochetkov, but he may have to go with him. And I think that there's a goaltending advantage there for Washington if Kochetkov is going against Thompson. In the West, I have Vegas in 6. I think Vegas will do what Los Angeles didn't do, which is pound Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl into the ice. I think they will body them every single chance that they could get. And with that big defense and with their forwards, I think they'll score goals, they'll score points because they're 2 of the best players in the world. But I think they will wear on them, and Edmonton will have to play them 20 to 25 minutes a night. And in the end, I think that'll wear them down.
All right, guys. Good stuff. Ryan, thank you for joining us live from Scotiabank following the big win for the Toronto Maple Leafs, taking a 1-0 lead in this series. That does it for the Hockey News Playoff Frenzy Live. For Michael Agello and Ryan Kennedy, I'm Katie Gauze. Thank you all for watching. We will be right back at it with more playoff action in round 2 tomorrow night. Until then, we'll see you guys later.